the Climate Bonds Initiative annual conference. We've been going for 2 days now, looking at green transitions, which is the focus of our work at the moment. We've done a huge amount of work in the green finance market, in Europe, in China, in ASEAN, in Brazil, around the world. We now have a green bond market that's $1 trillion in size. We have a green loan market that's $1 trillion also in size. And we have all sorts of other aspects to green finance getting going. It's been an incredible road we've traveled over the last few years. However, we are not there yet. Climate is still a problem. Emissions have to get down, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, by 50 to 55% in 10 years to have a reasonable chance, just a reasonable chance, of avoiding catastrophic climate change. So our work is cut out for us. The idea of this conference is we have to start tackling tough areas, more complex areas from the finance perspective. We want to increase the capital flows into transition investments. Some of that will be in the fossil fuel sector. You heard yesterday afternoon from people like Mark Lewis from BNP Paribas Asset Management or Paul Bodnar from Rocky Mountain Institute about the coal and oil and gas sector. And Luis Cabra from Repsol talked about their transition plans. We need to support those transition plans. Today, we're going to focus on hydrogen and steel as a focus. We've got some fantastic speakers lined up. But before we do that, there's a topic which has come up in the COVID crisis, and that is aviation. With the bailouts of airlines by governments, an opportunity has arisen to be able to start putting license to operate conditions on airlines to ensure that we start shifting. There are some challenges in how we do that. For example, the capex involved in shifting people to high-speed rail, which the French are looking at doing in the negotiations of KLM and Air France, is still huge in many countries. I've got a short video from Ari Bibelberg, who's a member of the Climate Bonds Initiative Technical Working Group on Transport, about an agenda for aviation. Just to put it in front of you, 3 minutes long, then we come back to hydrogen. Mari, can we run the video, please? This is a discussion starter for you.
Aviation needs to bring down its CO2 emissions to zero, not far beyond 2050. And this is a big challenge. I will share with you my insights about how this transition towards sustainable aviation can be achieved. I am Ari Breidenberg, I'm a mobility expert, and I'm a member of the Climate Bond Working Group on Transport. 3 main policy routes are advocated to reduce CO2 from aviation. That is faster trains, that is taxing aviation, and that is sustainable aviation fuels. I assessed these routes to see how effective are they in reducing CO2, what's their impact on ticket price, and what's their impact on travel volume. Faster trains will only have a limited impact on CO2 from aviation. I estimated that only 2 to 4% of CO2 from European aviation can be avoided by a shift to rail. The key in the transition towards sustainable aviation lies with the application of sustainable aviation fuels. I'm talking then about synthetic fuels made from wind and solar power, green energy, in combination with CO2 from the atmosphere, thus leading to carbon-free fuel. This fuel can be used in existing aircraft, which makes a fast transition possible. I'm not talking about biofuels. The supply of advanced biofuel is limited, so for aviation, the ultimate route is a shift towards synthetic kerosene. Synthetic kerosene is more expensive than current fossil kerosene. It costs about 4 to 6 times more, and this higher price of the fuel helps the transition to sustainable aviation, because it's a big incentive for the industry to improve the energy efficiency, and also because it raises ticket prices with 30 to 50%, which slows down the growth in aviation somewhat. So the key lever in the transition towards sustainable aviation is a shift towards green synthetic kerosene. This can be realized by government policy, by introducing blending mandates, obligations to start using synthetic kerosene in aviation, start with, say, 1%, scale up every year, and in 2050 it needs to be 100%. I see this as the key route to decarbonize aviation.
Thank you. If we can go back to the PowerPoint now, technical team. So I just wanted to put that on the table as something for us to think about as we start tackling different sectors. This is just a beginning of a proposal for aviation. We will be looking at a technical working group to pursue opportunities in aviation. There are many things involved, but there's something very interesting that Ari talked about in that. And as you can see, he's a scientist. We've got a lot of scientists who've got great expertise we need to bring into this conversation, which is the importance of a shift to a new fuel, synthetic fuel. This is what this session is about. Hydrogen, green hydrogen, but also blue hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen. So a fuel that has the promise of allowing a transition in so many sectors to be unlocked, which will otherwise not be unlocked. Just for our audience's sake, green hydrogen is hydrogen generated from renewable energy in the language of Europe. Blue hydrogen is hydrogen generated from gas power with carbon capture and sequestration. Most hydrogen in the world at the moment, 94 to 98%, is generated by gas or coal. That is called either black or grey hydrogen, so it has a very high emissions factor. What we want to focus on is the low carbon hydrogen. Not all hydrogen is good from a climate perspective, but some of it is very, very good. So we have a great panel today, but just a couple of housekeeping things. I need to thank our sponsors. This whole project, this whole conference would not happen with the support of institutions, as you see on the screen in front of you. You heard from Amundi, an Asian infrastructure bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank yesterday about the fantastic program on the climate change investment framework and their commitments. And President Jin's table thumping has gone around the world as a news story since then, and his commitments to a green transition. Credit Suisse, who supported us with our transitions paper, which was published on the first day of this conference as a framework for going ahead, have been fantastic. But you know, we've worked so closely with BNP Paribas Asset Management, with the world's first green exchange, Luxembourg Green Exchange, Goldman Sachs, Refinitiv, our major data partner, HSBC, and JP Morgan Indices. Thank you for supporting us in this conference. And then we have our supporter conferences, one of whom has, a few of them have financed the translations. This particular conference is being simultaneously translated into 5 languages: Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, Spanish, and Russian. We will have one speaker from HBIS later on who will be speaking in Chinese. At that point, folks, you will need to go on to the English channel to be able to understand him. This translations things on Zoom isn't as seamless as we would like. So when that comes, I will remind you, but you will need to find the translation button on your Zoom screen and switch to the English for the purposes of his speech, just so you know. The other thing I want to mention is hashtag. At the bottom of the page, if you are a tweeter, hashtag CBIConf20. We do have a WeChat channel as well for Climate Bonds Initiative if you're going to do something in WeChat. This is our agenda for the day. We've got a lot of things happening. In the next session, regulators, the CIO of State Street Global Assets, Denise Odaro of IFC will speak, and so on during the day. I'm going to now make an intervention at 5:30 Paris time as a summary speech of where we're trying to go, a 10-point agenda for the next 10 years. So if you're interested in staying on, come in. It'll be available as a recording as well, especially if you're in China. The Q&A is run through the app. You will see an option to ask questions. We will pick up a few questions from the panel. Otherwise, we will answer them in situ. That's it. Remember though, recordings will be available till December, so you can catch up again then. Our speakers start off with my dear friend Zoe Knight, who we've been collaborating on climate issues for God knows how many years. She's now the Managing Director of the HSBC Centre of Sustainable Finance. We're privileged to have Dr. Cheng Wai representing the China Hydrogen Alliance, who's an expert on the area of hydrogen from his work at the National Institute of Clean and Low Carbon Energy. Pierre-Etienne Franck from Air Liquide, Vice President of Hydrogen, devoted his life to hydrogen over the last few years, will speak. Jindong Wang from HBIS Group, which is the second largest steel company in China. And finally, Paddy Padmanathan, who's the CEO of Aquapower, will join us in about 40 minutes. He's caught up in something else. So Zoe, I think that means I'm now going over to you. Kick us off.
Thank you, Sean, and it's an absolute delight to have worked with you for so long. I'm only slightly disappointed that we're not moving the agenda forwards more quickly, but that's not through want of trying. We've been working our hardest to champion the agenda. And indeed, moving forward, as we think about transition finance as well as green finance, I'm delighted to be sharing some insights in moving momentum forward in the hydrogen sector. But first, I just wanted to set out what finance is thinking about to set the tone for the day. What we need to worry about is how to transition our capital stock to be aligned with the Paris Agreement. That means not only investing in ramping up the solutions, it means supporting today's high carbon industries so that they can be the low carbon leaders of the future. And to do that, we're working very closely with the industrial sectors like steel and cement that operate in those areas that perhaps don't have as clear a cut pathway as we can see for the utilities sector, for instance, that needs to move forward with renewable power. So, financed emissions and transition, and how does hydrogen fit into that? Well, first off, if we can just take the slide back to where it was before, the momentum will be driven by three factors. One is an increase in demand, two is a ramp up in government policy, and three are moves to set an appropriate carbon price. So the good news is 2 out of 3 of those drivers are already in place. In terms of the increasing demand, we can see that this is already happening. So HSBC organised a Hydrogen Week back in June, where we talked with investors and corporates about their activities in looking at this space. And what we found out was that producers of electrolyzers were really scaling up to meet a multi-gigawatt pipeline of projects that have already been announced. So that is projects along the lines of those set out by Equinor working in the UK, Mitsubishi working in Japan, and other locations. So number one, demand is increasing, which is of course fundamental to bringing down the costs of generating green hydrogen, because that's what we all want to get to, green hydrogen. Secondly, government policy. Now, the good news is this is also happening. So one of the areas that we've seen in terms of the Build Back Better in response to the COVID crisis is several hydrogen strategies being put forward. So now we've got support mechanisms in Japan, Korea, China. We've had recent announcements from California. Australia put hydrogen as a basis of the Build Back Better campaign. And not only that, here in the EU, we've got a comprehensive hydrogen strategy, which is set to take us from around 6 gigawatts of capacity in 2024 to a massive 40 by 2030. So the policy framework is in place, and that's prompting an investment framework as well. So here in the EU, we're looking at around a 220 to 340 billion investment opportunity across the board, which of course is good news. Thirdly, carbon pricing. Now, of course, this is something that we've been talking about for a long time, and Sean and I have had many debates on the merits of carbon pricing and what we can do to make it scale up quicker. But this would really help within the hydrogen industry as a whole, particularly for its use in steel and cement. And that's critical in terms of moving this forward. But in terms of having 2 out of 3 of the major drivers, I think that's got to be a pretty good platform to build from as we scale up now. So, of course, the other thing to point out in terms of why hydrogen is so important for an accelerated transition is the role that it has in scaling up electrification, and particularly for renewables. So we, of course, already know that the secret to reducing emission is to become much more energy efficient and to scale up renewable power. Now, the shift to green hydrogen can really support that acceleration and support that scale up. So that's all I really wanted to talk about this morning. The point is to say that transition finance is really working hard to be able to demonstrate how emissions can be brought down. And I think we're probably going to hear a little bit later on about the sorts of products and opportunities that are coming through in that transition finance space. And that 2 out of the 3 main drivers for acceleration are starting to really come through. The demand driver, if we can scale up demand from end markets and in terms of capacity, that will of course create the shift. The policy drivers, as we build back better out of COVID, and that is creating, together they're both creating an investment opportunity, which means that investors themselves can start really demonstrating that they are aligned with the aims of the Paris goals, which of course is what is set out in Article 2C of the agreement itself. So I'll leave that there, Sean. Delighted to be participating in this session and look forward to any questions that the audience may have.
Thanks, Zoe. We will come back to you a little later with a specific question about the role HSBC is playing and can play in doing this. So I'll park that for you to think about. Dr. Wei Chung, can I
yes,
come to you? If you
all right.
Let me know put your hand up, I'll move your slides forward.
Okay, thanks, Sean. I'm Qian Wei. I'm from National Institute of Clean and Low Carbon Energy. It's a research arm of the China Energy Group. So it's great to be here. But today I'm speaking on behalf of China Hydrogen Alliance. And here's a brief introduction of the China Hydrogen Alliance. Basically 4 functions. One is serve as a think tank to provide support to central government and local governments to really to formulate and develop hydrogen strategy and hydrogen plan. So that's one. Secondly, it's a platform to allow players in hydrogen industry to exchange ideas, to collaborate, to move the industry forward. The third is an advocate for the more updated standards and to upgrade the protocols, make sure the China's standards and codes are up to date. And the last one's really about a business incubator to serve as a business incubator to grow new businesses through the alliance's connections and influence. Basically, we can use 3 words to describe the China Hydrogen Alliance. That's a coordination of the strategy of a plan. It's a collaboration of the alliance members, and of course, it's acceleration of the industry, the hydrogen industry. Next page, please. Now, here is our view of hydrogen energy. Here we use 2 graphs. One's from the US DOE, and the other is from the Hydrogen Council. Basically, hydrogen, the one is really a central piece of future energy ecosystem. On one hand, it connects with the power generation. Here it can be a renewable, it can be fossil fuels, and you can using those fuels to produce hydrogen. At the same time, you can use hydrogen to produce electricity. At the same time, to connect with applications, there can be transportation, can be chemical industry, can be refining, can be steel, or anything related to the use of hydrogen. So that's one aspect, is a connection. And the second aspect is a decarbonization. Here, we see hydrogen play a major role in CO2 mitigation. In this case, obviously hydrogen can really to enable large-scale renewables, either by use as a buffer or distributor. And it can really reduce CO2 emission downstream. For example, transportation, for example, this home industry use, and also other applications. So that's our simple and a very high level view of the hydrogen energy. Next page. And here's what's happening in China as a very high level status summary. First, in terms of hydrogen production, China probably is the highest in terms of production capacity. We're talking about 27 million tons a year, which the total world capacity is 150 million tons. So it's a pretty meaningful percentage. And the second, in terms of hydrogen source. Now in China right now, most of the hydrogen is from fossil energy based source. You can see the coal to hydrogen is almost 50%, 43% here. And then we have natural gas based hydrogen production. We have refinery hydrogen production. And of course, we also have this industrial byproducts. So really, when we're talking about green hydrogen, means hydrogen from renewables, really, really small percentage at the moment. It's less than 0.3% for now. And in terms of hydrogen refueling stations in China, it's a still small number, but it's going bigger and bigger in the last few years, as you can see from the top right, the plot. Right at the end of last year, we have 46 stations in China. It's quite small. I think right now there's a lot more stations under planning and under construction. By the end of this year, even with this COVID-19 situation, I would not be surprised 100 more stations by the end of this year. So it's going strong with hydrogen refueling station construction. And then the bottom right is fuel cell vehicle sales in China. It's a still small number, but it gets some momentum. I think right now the total, it's only, I can't even see it, 6,000 vehicles right now, but a lot of momentum, a lot of efforts to push much more in this direction. Next page, please. Now, this page, I'm specifically talking about hydrogen production. I think this is probably related to the topic or theme today. I mentioned in the previous page, there are a lot of different ways to make hydrogen. In China, the coal to hydrogen is the lowest cost right now, but the two things with the coal to hydrogen. One, you need to do quite a significant purification for the fuel cell applications. Second, then you need CO2 to address the CO2 issue. So that's the one thing. And then the second, I think right now, to us, it's a pretty meaningful pathway is a byproduct, industrial byproduct hydrogen. Now, in this case, we don't have to count on the CO2 footprint since it's a byproduct. Or we can go with a curtail the renewable electrolysis, like curtail wind, to produce hydrogen. Right now, it's also pretty low price because of the overcapacity. But for conventional electrolysis, as you can see on the far right, the cost is still high. It's roughly 30 RMB per kilogram. But we do see a substantial drop in the next 5 years. If you look at the right-hand plot, it's today 2020 roughly 30 RMB per kilogram, and we see the three knobs we can really drive down the cost. One is the electrolysis efficiency. We can go from 65% to 75, even higher. That's a 15-20% gain. And the second thing, the biggest part is the energy cost, the solar energy, wind energy cost. Now this actually is a fast track right now. You see the cost is, look at the solar cost down tremendously in the last few years. We see further reduction in the next 5 years. And then the last piece is obvious is CapEx of the electricity equipment. That when you have a skill, when you have a manufacturing maturity, then the CapEx of the electrolysis system is also going down. So if you see this, you go from 31 to 20%, that's over 30% reduction in the next 5 years. But if you look at where the arrow is, now in some of the areas, the renewable energy drop even further. So we can go to 15 RMB per kilogram or less, 10 to 15. That's in the ballpark, that being the same as the coal to hydrogen. So that's pretty much the pretty low cost route as we see.
That's
and
amazing.
If the past experience really matter, and this could be conservative. Go next page. And this is my last page, just talking a little what are the efforts the China Hydrogen Alliance are focused on. First of all, for the post-COVID-19 actions, we have a plan in place how to really help each other to drive the growth of the hydrogen industry. And there actually, we have a specific post-COVID-19 plan. And then obviously we would like to get more support to push the growth of the industry from the government, from energy industry, from transportation sectors, and from research institutions and universities. There is through the supply chain collaboration, whole entire industry to work together. And the third thing is about hydrogen safety promotion and actions. Now, on one hand, there are lots of misconceptions about hydrogen safety, but on the other hand, also some real thing we need to deal with. We cannot afford any missteps in safety handling, and that will kill the whole thing. And then the next piece about hydrogen infrastructure focus. Now, with this economic challenge right now, there's a renewed focus on infrastructure building, and we like to bring the hydrogen infrastructure into this focus. Make sure hydrogen infrastructure is a big part of that. Then obviously codes and standards I already talked about. And the next big piece is technology innovation, technology research and collaboration. That's something really critical to further drive costs down. And the last piece is a hydrogen ecosystem push. Basically, you want to build an ecosystem to allow the industry to grow healthily. So in summary, we're pushing for investment, pushing for technology, pushing for standards, and of course, pushing for the healthy growth of the whole industry. That's pretty much from me. I'm looking forward to any question and discussions later on.
We certainly will have, but that's a very exciting vision about cost reduction. And I did note, Zoe, that one of the components that was CapEx cost. And we do have this arbitrage opportunity between interest rates in Japan, in Europe, in the US, and the cost of capital in China. And one of the things we're looking at, and we're very proud to have been accepted as a member of the China Hydrogen Alliance recently at Climate Bonds, is there work we can do to get lower cost capital to this transition in China, as well as in other parts of the world where this is happening.
Yes.
So we'll come back to that a little bit later. But
all right.
Pierre Rathin from Air Liquide. Air Liquide is a massive gases provider in Europe and the world. And Pierre Rathin runs the hydrogen side of things, which something we want to be, or at least the Climate Bonds Initiative, a vast part of the transition going forward. Over to you. I'll get your slides going.
Thank you. I'm going to use maybe two hats, and I will start probably to use my hat as a co-founder and secretary of the Hydrogen Council as well, because it's taking part of my time. And I think the council did a lot to try to shape the ambition and the vision, and to make people understand that indeed, if you are seriously serious about the energy transition, you need to tackle very rapidly the hard-to-abate sectors, the famous one we're speaking about, which is industry, heavy transportation, intensive, and heavy mobility. And for those ones, if you don't move into low carbon or green hydrogen, it's not going to work. So I guess I'm going to start with a couple of outline of a study we just commissioned earlier this year from the council, trying to look at the roadmap to bring costs down, on whether all those applications could be cost competitive in the future. So I think we can move through those slides, because we said we had too many. So this is the study. This is the name of the study. You can find it in the council site, and I'm going just to focus on a couple of those. So this one first. What we did in that study, we gathered the members' vision and knowledge on their respective sectors, and we looked at 33 downstream applications for hydrogen, which represent basically 60% of the overall world emissions, and looked whether hydrogen could become competitive not only with the incumbent alternative technologies, if there are some, in some cases there's none, and if it can be also competitive with the fossil-based incumbent technologies. And as you will see, there are basically, as a summary, half of those could see hydrogen become the right vector to clean them. And for that, we will need green hydrogen. If we move to the next slide, not this one, yes. We have, next one. We have, I'm trying to follow your
Sorry,
your
Pierre-Etienne, I've messed up, my apologies. Keep instructing me.
So this is a summary of the results. Basically, on the top right side of the graph, you've got the segments of use cases for hydrogen, which are going to be both competitive vis-a-vis fossil-based incumbent solutions and also alternative low carbon solutions. So they're all mostly related to heavy transportation, if you look at those. And then the second part of the ones which we believe are very important is the hard-to-abate sectors, are basically the top left part of the graph, which is the light blue, basically topics. And you will see it's covering mostly heavy industries, steel making, refining, methanol production, ammonia, many sectors where you basically don't have so many other choices. So they're going to be still more costly, of course, than the incumbent system. But this is the only way if you want to decarbonize them. And that's where we need to put a strong attention in the future. If we go to the next slide, we went, of course, with a lot of details into the supply chain, the value chain buildup of cost to see what those applications would be in the future. And here you have a kind of a graph showing the level of cost at which hydrogen-based solutions per segment becomes competitive. And you basically see that if you manage to bring hydrogen downstream to the end customers, either directly to a refinery or to a station for a truck, a car, a bus, a train, or a boat, you need to be in the range of $4 to $6 per kilo, which is basically half the current estimated pricing that we're capable to supply today using gray hydrogen. So you've got two challenges. You need to move from gray to blue or green by still reducing cost, and you need to decrease the cost downstream. And you need also to decrease the cost of the end user's application, which is the fuel cell part, the reservoirs, the equipment in the truck, in the boat, etc. So as you can see, if you reach those $4 to $6 per kilo, you cover a massive number of key heavy industries and heavy transportation segments. And there are some of the ones where you can reach higher pricing. We will not, because competition is heavy, but because in fact you don't have any other choice. If you move to the next one, and we have we go to a focus on what is the topic of today, which is basically green hydrogen. And it's very interesting to look at the Chinese presentation, because in fact we have different levels, but I think I can explain why. So in average, hydrogen produced from electrolyzer today is reaching around €6 per kilo. This is very high. This is basically 4.5 to €5 more than the current gray hydrogen pricing. But if you look at the vision down the road, gathering the visions from operators like us, but also from equipment manufacturers and from utilities, we think we can basically divide it by two at least. And it's basically a sum of two major components. The first one is getting benefits from the continuous decrease of renewable costs. If you continue to see renewable costs decreasing and reaching $15 to $20 per megawatt hour over an extended period of time in the year, which means 4,000 to 5,000 hours per year, then you've got a significant reduction of the variable part of the electrolysis. And then the second part, where we have a difference with China, is the capex part. The capex part need and can decrease by 3, which is going to account for around 1.6 euros per kilo of reduction of TCO. And it's a lot more what we have here than what we have in China, because China is already very low in terms of capex. We know, because we buy electrolyzers in China and in Europe, and there is a difference in the capex cost of electrolyzers in China. So if you get the two, then you can reach something around $2.5, $3 per kilo. But for that, you need to look at the small figure, which is below the capex, which is 90 gigawatt. It's not gonna reach that level of cost if you don't scale up. We need a gigantic scale up of the industry to reach those capex level. And this is where, of course, policymakers and policy support schemes are going to be fundamental. If we move to the next slide.
So Pierre-Etienne, can I interrupt you briefly? Because Chagway was saying he thought prices would end up at around $2.20 in his figure, in 15 renminbi. And you're saying 3. So you're both saying substantial price reductions.
Yeah.
And we're subject to a couple of things happening. So for all our investors online, listen to this next phase quickly, because these are the critical issues to see whether we can get to this price reduction that would revolutionize our supply chain, our transport industries. I think that's very clear, isn't it? Volume procurement.
You're right. For that, we need the volume, and we still need customers to pay and to value this price difference, because still at €3, you're still higher than gray hydrogen, and which is normal. I'm not saying it's absolutely normal, because it's a clean hydrogen versus a not clean in a way. So of course there is a difference, but we need the consumer to pay. And for that, you need the regulations, you need compulsory measures to make everyone play by the rules, so that in the end, only blue and green hydrogen are becoming the new normal. And that's the decade that we're gonna go through. And so that's why I want to go to the next slide, also for the sake of cost of time. Not this one, you can see it, but to see that, of course, green is the long-term ultimate goal, because we want to shift to a renewable world. But if you don't work with the existing assets, which are already very efficient, and just try to shift them into low carbon by developing carbon capture technologies or using biomethane as a fuel instead of methane, then you're not using the huge potential to have very rapidly a competitive source of blue hydrogen. Because if you see the curve, what we call the low carbon, which is basically gray hydrogen plus carbon capture, is only going to cost €1 more than what it is today, because CCS already works. It's just a question of enabling it to go massive. We are already Air Liquide operating one of the largest carbon capture systems in France, and we just need now to find the right sequestration point to make it work. And if you get the right regulation to support that, you get blue hydrogen competitive very rapidly. We still need green. I'm not saying we don't need green. We need both. That's the point. If you look at the kind of a summary of the big elements of cost reduction, which is the next slide, you will see that, in fact, you've got three major elements that are going to put those applications competitive and at sight in the decade. First one, we just got through that, is basically the hydrogen production cost in a clean way, which means blue or green, to reduce by 60%, which is a significant change. Second, the distribution part. People tend to forget, but transportation is the first sector to need to move to low carbon hydrogen because it's the one that is going to be tackled by the regulations in the next 5 years. And the big element, the other big element of cost is the downstream part of the value chain, the stations. Today, stations are small, they're not many, and they're not loaded. So when tomorrow you've got large captive fleets, which are compulsory shifting to hydrogen, then you can bring bigger station, 2 to 5 times bigger. You can load them rapidly, and you make series of them. And the mix of the three is going to enable to reduce by 70% the downstream part of the distribution. And that's fundamental. And we need to find the right PPPs to enable those massive retail infrastructure deployment, because if you don't get them, you don't bring the volume, you don't bring the cost down, and you don't have the change. And the last point, of course, is related to it, is the component cost of the applications, basically fuel cell, reservoir, and all the components that you need to put in a car, in a mobility application, where a lot is being done by the Korean, the Japanese, and many other players in Europe, but we need more, and volumes are going to bring the cost down again by 50%. What you can say, if you look at the next slide, is that those figures, in fact, are not very aggressive compared to what we've seen. Next slide, if you can. Those figures are not very aggressive if you compare them with the learning rate and the learning curve of the other major revolutions in the energy world over the past decades: battery, solar, and wind. The learning rates were in between 17 to 40% per level of per step change, while for fuel cell, for electrolysis, we're looking rather at 10 to 15% learning rate. So we are rather conservative in the figures that we've computed and in the result of that. So it's not it's an ambitious target, but it's not irrational compared to what has been achieved with other technologies. And on the right side, you see the different elements that are going to make that work. I will finish by a small word on Air Liquide, because indeed we are, I think, a player on the topic. Please, can you just show 1 second the former slide? This is just, as you said, reminding everyone that we are one of the largest producers, distributors, and enablers of the hydrogen economy, and we are already making a lot of business around that, with around 2 billion of sales, mostly for refining, petrochemicals, steel, but also the space industry. And what we've been doing in the last 10 years, if you move then to the last slide, is indeed to try to prepare the shift by trying to enable the buildup of consortia of retail infrastructure in Germany, in Japan, in Korea, in California, building stations, enabling consortia to be built and to start the deployment of mobility. But also we've been investing significantly over the last 10 years, largest carbon capture solution in France, largest PEM electrolysis, so green hydrogen manufacturing in Canada, that is going to start in 3 months, 20 megawatts. It's already very significant. Many people are announcing gigawatt size projects, but there's none yet of that size being started. So good to speak about gigawatt, but let's make first the first 100 megawatt schemes rapidly. And last, we're also building the biggest liquid hydrogen facility to supply the hydrogen market for mobility in California. So we're trying to be a player and key player in that new wave, and we think that indeed this is the topic of the decade. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre-Etienne. Sorry, I was getting so excited about going into Wang Jindong's screen. I've moved these PowerPoints in. But before I go there, Changwai, do you want to react to any of that stuff about pricing? Does that look right? I mean, the European price point that Pierre-Etienne's talking about looks a little bit higher than what you think we can get to in China. Any comment?
I think it's a great talk. And look at the roadmap. I don't see a major difference in terms of final cost reduction roadmap. I saw that by 2030, talking $2 per kilogram. Now we're talking about 2025. In some part of the region, you can go to that range. It's a little earlier, but most part of it is still higher than 15 RMB, which means $2, roughly $2. So it's in ballpark. It's a similar, and we see the similar drop in efficiency, and we also see the major knob is the energy cost, and they talk about offshore. We talk about as renewable in general, and obviously I saw the Frank had the higher cost reduction on capex. He mentioned the reason why, because in China the capex is already low. I think it's logically it's pretty consistent to me.
I think so as well, honestly. I think it's rather interesting to see that it's not completely surprising because we have Chinese players in the council. We are members of the organization that you are leading. So normally we should share more or less some kind of vision for the future.
Great. And one of the things that we're very keen to see is more China-Europe collaboration on this at a government level as well. But we might come back to that in the Q&A. So Jindong, thank you very much for joining us. HBIS Group is China's second largest steel company. It has a very strong green mandate, green objective, and it has a pathway it's seeking. Jindong's going to talk a little bit about what they're doing, and we're going to end up with asking him about the prospects for green hydrogen. To be able to listen as our speakers, you'll need to, or now everyone on the call, you'll need to go and choose the English channel for Jindong's remarks. Jindong, over to you to go ahead. Can you hear me, Jindong? Image is frozen. We may have to... Go ahead. Okay, it looks like connection challenges are defeated.
We hear you now, so if you're going to translate, that's fine.
Thank you. Go ahead. Okay, we might have to shift ahead back to the discussion in that case. I'm just... Chang Wei, we're having some challenges with Jindong connecting. Now, you would have thought in this day and age, we would have been able to make our China-Europe communication more successful. But
so
clearly we still have some challenges.
It seems his pictures freeze.
He might have to log out and log back in.
Okay.
So I'm going to just talk to the couple of brief slides while he does that. Just to give a flavor, you see that HBIS is a vast company going forward. It's a major crude steel production. It's one of the Fortune 500. It has a would you believe, 120,000 employees, which is not unusual in China. When I first visited the offices of the People's Bank of China, the senior official there said to me that they have 400,000 employees, which I'm going to tell you is a lot bigger than the Bank of England or the European Central Bank. Of course, institutions in China have many functions, but the key thing is, from our perspective, in transition, it means for a steel company like HBIS, who's moving from high carbon to low carbon, they have to make sure that they protect their employees and bring their employees along with them. We have a just transition question here. While Jindong is coming back in, we now have Paddy Padmanathan just joining us from Aqua, which is the Middle East and the North Africa's largest private energy company, I think, Paddy. We're going to go to Paddy next, and then we're going to try again with Jindong in a little while, if that's okay. So what I'm going to do is just turn the PowerPoint off for a minute. And Paddy, you are now live. And can you please tell Jindong that we will try again once Paddy's finished? So Paddy, you're on mute still. You've got a big story to tell because of your recent announcement, but we've been talking about cost reductions. Thank you for being able to join us.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, Sean, for having me. Delighted to be part of this. Look, financing is going to be a huge requirement because renewable energy is very capital intensive, operational cost low. So plenty of money needed up front, and producing green hydrogen is going to be no different. We're going to need lots of capital. So delighted to come and chat to you. So yeah, I mean, look, the thing that I think has captured everybody's attention is the project that we have formally announced, the partnership with Air Products as well as with NEOM, the region in northern part of Saudi Arabia, very visionary, sort of bold vision in creating it's not a city, a whole region that's going to be focused on the future way of living, the green economy, attracting technology, and being carbon neutral. So that region. So the three parties have come together to develop this first project, which will be a plant that will be a plant to produce 650 tons per day of hydrogen that will be fed by 4,000 megawatts of renewable energy. And the renewable energy will be a mixture of photovoltaic and wind for a good reason. Well, the sun shines in that part of the world very well throughout the day, every day, but also the wind blows very well, very strongly at night as well. So we are able to stretch the capacity utilization of electrolyzers for a longer period than otherwise. So it's a 650,000 ton a day hydrogen plant fed by 4,000 megawatts of renewable energy, but also we are then taking that hydrogen and converting it to liquid ammonia in order to be able to then ship it over long distance. Because we don't want to hang around waiting for some invention. That is the easiest way of moving this hydrogen around over long distance. So that's the plan. Now, if that all goes into, let us say, vehicles, most likely it probably will initially, that will fuel, on average, 700,000 vehicles. What that means, it'll take out 3 million tons per year of carbon dioxide. The investment needed, as we have publicly stated, is in the order of $5 billion. That's just for the hydrogen ammonia power plant, taking it to the port and putting it to the ship. Then there is a separate bunch of investments that's going to be needed to receive it on the other end, convert it back to ammonia, and so on and so forth, and distribute it. So at a very high level, that's what it is. So for me, this is a truly exciting project, simply because, I mean, look, there are many others who are also looking to develop green ammonia projects, and I think green hydrogen projects, sorry. And I think what is now needed, given the fact that we have already got such a low cost, reliable, renewable energy available in certain parts of the world, for some of these projects to now come in as quickly as possible. Now, initially, I think the easiest place they will go into, get used, is in transportation, simply because there are pockets where there are incentives available to start with. And then there are certain areas where it's easier to put that hydrogen in without kind of extensive refueling stations and so on and so forth. However, truly exciting place that hydrogen, I see it getting used in the not too distant future, is in all the other hard to abate sectors. So, I mean, what I'm excited about is the fact that we are able to do this first. We already have the offtake agreed. There will be others, I think, in the same sort of following a similar pattern. But 2, 3, 4 of these sort of scale projects will start to drive the cost down. We need to get costs down to, and we can. I mean, it's very clear for me that within a few projects, we can get costs down to $2 a kilo of hydrogen. We need to get to $1.
Sorry, Paddy. $2 a kilo. You think it's feasible?
I am very confident that we can. I mean, look, I think I saw in the slide decks a very nice slide that shows you how to get there. I mean, what are the inputs? The inputs are you need to electrolyzer cost. So what drives these costs? Electrolyzer cost, power cost, and the capacity utilization cost. Okay, so if you can get your electrolyzer cost down to, well, okay, today, electrolyzer, you go to any electrolyzer supplier, they'll tell you $500 a kilo, a kilowatt. Okay, so if you take $500 a kilowatt and you take $20 a megawatt, easy. These are all easy figures to achieve. Huh? And let's not stretch ourselves. 30%, 40% utilization, you're already at $2.50 a kilo in the right places. Okay, wow. Credit-worthy environments. Huh? So cost of capital needs to be also be attractive, and that means credit-worthy environments play in the right places. So so what to get to $1, we need the electrolyzer cost to come down to $200. We need the power cost to come down to 1 cent, and the capacity factor to go to 50%. It's not beyond the wit of us. No issue. I really, really do think that it is just a matter of a few projects.
Fantastic. And Pierre-Etienne, we might come back to you on that question too, with Paddy's very bullish view. So Paddy, you've got some grand plans, and of course you're building this facility in the Neom area, which is a extraordinary high radiation and wind energy. Most people don't know that the Gulf of Aqaba is a really intense wind spot going forward. And I think Saudi Aramco has had a wind farm there for years. So you've got a map of places around the world where you see the opportunity is in Morocco and UAE and other countries and so on.
Chile, Australia, yeah.
Right, and Chile and Australia. Okay, and that's great to know, because I'm speaking to the Chilean government at the moment around their taxonomy and their green plan. So I'm going to ask them about this. So you've got these grand ambitions. You've had an extraordinary rapid growth at Aqua in the last 14 years, from virtually nothing to a very large producer. So am I right in thinking, my hunch is, that you're now seeing another level of step up of growth based on this clean energy and also the hydrogen side? Is that what your backers are telling you?
Yes. So look, I mean, nothing clever. We've been at the right place doing the right thing at the right time, to be fair. And we've been able to attract and retain very good people, to be fair, very strong shareholders. So we're just feeding the market, and market is needing more and more renewable energy. So you're right. Even without green hydrogen, we were already seeing a huge step change in the growth of the company that I'm privileged to lead. Hydrogen just adds to that. So if we were going to kind of grow faster, simply because of so much more renewable energy being needed, it's going to be even faster, simply because now we have got more energy that is going to be needed for hydrogen. Which is absolutely down a one-way street now. Huh? There's no coming back. I think all you will see is the first project being implemented, and there you go, one after the other.
What are the question marks for hydrogen and the transport of it? And I'm interested to see what Pierre-Etienne and Chung Wai think about this. Is if we're producing the hydrogen in places like the Gulf of Aqaba, NEOM, or in Chile, does that mean that industry gravitates? If we're going to, like the steel industry, have to have a big capex pipeline of building new steel plants to do this, should they be located at energy source rather than in production? In other words, not so much in Hebei or in Germany, but in Chile or Saudi? Chang-Wai, what do you think of this question?
You're on mute.
You're on mute. And
sorry, so you're asking, so should we relocate to the manufacturing side where the resource is what you're asking?
Will we see a reallocation? Is this likely going forward? If Paddy brings in hydrogen at $2, as he's saying, does that mean we can expect to see plants start popping up in Saudi Arabia and Chile and Australia and moving out of Hebei and Germany?
I think we would look at the total picture. Let's see, you would have the hydrogen production, then talking about the total, if you're using steel production as an example, then you look into a total picture of the labor cost, steel, the efficiency of the plant, and obviously the hydrogen cost is part of that overall equation. I can't give you a straight answer for now, but it's an overall consideration, something we should look into that.
Look, sorry to jump into that. Just a simple, one way to think about it, okay? So today, what is going to be the cheapest to shift? Is hydrogen cheap to shift, or is it going to be the raw materials that's needed for steel cheap to shift? Well, today the answer is the raw material. So, okay, so if we can produce using green hydrogen steel at $400, $450 a ton, which I believe we're not very far away from, then we're going to find it easier. We're going to be able to do that by keeping the hydrogen close to the point of production of the steel. We're not going to be able to achieve that number if we start putting transport costs for the hydrogen, because transport of hydrogen over a very long distance is an expensive value proposition right now.
Pierre-Etienne, do you want to jump in here at all? This interesting business about Paddy's raised?
This is, I think, the move from our product on Aqua, of course, is very bold and very impressive. I am also very impressed by the figures you consider as being already granted, because I still believe it's a little bit aggressive.
No, I'm telling you we can get there. Sorry.
Okay, no, because I think it's still a challenge. I think, in fact, they're showing a way, which is one of the way the industry will take, is to go massive with very large scale type of plants. And the ammonia route, it is true, is today already mature. It's easy to transport ammonia by ship today. The issue is to reconvert ammonia into hydrogen down the road for the final use. If you were using ammonia for power plants or for ammonia market, I would be very comfortable with the scheme. Where we are a little bit cautious is the technology readiness level of the ammonia split into hydrogen is not exactly the same level of the rest. So that's a small challenge they might have, but they still have some time, because it's going to take some years to build the project. On your second topic on whether this is also going to shift where steel making is going to take place, yes, potentially, but we should never forget the legacy cost of the assets, which turns to be an asset in the end. If you have very large steel plants in several places, the cost of shutting down, dismantling, and relocating is significant, and the capital cost associated to it is significant. So I think as the most they can reuse existing assets, the better it's going to be for the existing industry. But it's true that for the new investment capacities, it is possible that the capacity to do very cheap hydrogen in Middle East countries or in Australia or in Chile could attract new investments in those southern hemispheres places and could reshuffle fundamentally the industry. That's true.
Interesting times. I mean, we've seen Sanjeev Gupta buy up the Whyalla Steel Works in Australia and then building a green hydrogen facility specifically to make zero carbon steel. Relatively small facility, but it's a bit of happening. So whether creative destruction affects the existing legacy assets or not is going to be a fascinating question for the next few years. But folks, if you're listening, you just heard 3 extraordinary statements about the forward cost, the likely or the potential forward cost of green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. We're keeping, this is blue hydrogen as part of this transition. You've heard it from China, you've heard it from Europe, and you've heard it from Paddy Padmanathan at Aqua. You'll have to figure out which is most bullish and most believable of the bullish things, but I'm going to tell you, whatever the cost reduction pathway looks incredible. We now have Jindong Wang back on, I think. So choose your channel. Your English language channel. We're going to have a shot at getting him to join us. And I'm just going back to the PowerPoint, Jindong, so you can get going. Please, go ahead, Jindong. Okay, it looks like we're having difficulties still. Okay, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to quickly show you Jindong's PowerPoint because there's a few important slides there, and we'll see if we can get him in. We work in China all the time. Usually it works well on the right kind of format, but unfortunately, this new era of online conferencing, especially because with the Great Firewall of China, we have some difficulty sometimes between different platforms connecting. So we've still got work to do. I'm moving on now to, I'm moving on to his slides. Something weird is happening at my end too. This is just unfortunate. Okay, goal and direction of hydrogen development with HBIS. Jindong, I hope you don't mind me speaking over you. Just cut in if you are able to join us. But at the moment, I can't hear you at all, I'm afraid. So we have HBIS backing up, and Chang Wei, help me out here. HBIS backing up the conversations that we've had so far about transport being an incredible path going forward. You will see significant investment figures that are being proposed here. HBIS has been doing something initially around capturing of gases from coke ovens. They have a commitment to trying to achieve green outcomes, but there are some interesting pathways they've taken in the short term in the absence of low-cost blue and green hydrogen being available. So that's how they're starting to go forward. PowerPoint keeps jumping, guys. I'm sorry, I don't know what the hell's going on. Chang Wei, I think we'll just have to tell Jindong that we'll pick him up at another time. It's going to be a bit challenging. They're exploring low cost.
I don't have a connection with him right now.
Okay, exploring low cost green hydrogen production technology. It's part of their plan. When we spoke the other day, they're essentially saying that at the moment they're looking at a range of other areas to reduce emissions in their existing plants. And they're saying that if we can deliver, and I say we, I'm talking about you on the call, this is Chang Wei, Pierre-Etienne, Paddy, and the industry, lower cost green hydrogen, they are ready and set to shift to a green hydrogen strategy. Now, of course, we've seen other steel companies make this commitment recently, but generally they're going to be producing higher cost steel. ThyssenKrupp made a huge announcement a couple of weeks ago. SSAB in Scandinavia says it's going to be selling zero carbon steel by 2026. We've seen the Sanjay Gupta, Whyalla Steelworks, and so on. And Baowu in China has also made an announcement about their interest in shifting to low carbon steel as part of forward. So the steel companies are setting themselves up to be able to take advantage of the price reduction we're talking about today. Jindong, can you hear me?
Okay, good. 听见你了，听见你了。
你们听见了吗？
听见你，听得见吗？
你们能听见吗？
We can hear you now. You'll have to make sure you're using the English channel if you want to use the English channel. Go ahead, Jindong.
你可以用一个，他说是英文频道，
能听见吗？
听得见。
哎，核钢发展氢能呢，主要是在这个氢能物流方面我们做的一些工作。那么我们氢能物流的主要是依托我们2个钢铁企业的氢气资源，在唐山和邯郸呢建造2个加氢站。那么通过建设加氢站和重卡运输呢，柴油汽车改氢能汽车的示范运行，来构建真正意义上的绿色可循环的生态工业运输体系。目前呢，我们汉钢加氢站已经投产运营了，这个也是中国钢铁行业首个固定式的加氢示范站，实现了国内首列49吨的氢燃料电池的重卡车的同步运营。我们唐山的加氢站呢，9月底马上也要投运了，能听见吗？那么核钢发展氢能第2个领域是氢冶金。氢还原呢代表世界冶金发展的方向。核钢呢以自产煤气制氢作为还原具，建设120万吨的氢还原制备高品质的清洁原料的示范项目。我们从改变能源消耗结构入手呢，来彻底解决钢铁冶金过程中产生的环境污染和碳排放问题。我们
Jindong, we're going to have to move a bit more quickly because we're running late. So can we jump ahead a couple of PowerPoint slides? This isn't going to work. I'm cancelling it. Jindong, we're having problems again. I think we're going to have to cancel it, I'm afraid, and go straight to the final discussion because we're coming close to the end of the session. I'm very sorry about this. We'll have to pick up the conversation another time. We're committed, I want to say, to supporting your plans around hydrogen development and committing to working with you as a fellow member, with Air Kid, of the China Hydrogen Alliance. But I think our technical problems have overcome us. I'm sorry. We're going to have to move ahead to the rest of the conversation. I don't know why. We'll do a post-mortem afterwards and we'll come back to you and try and figure out how we can ensure this works in future. So folks, I now need to get us back onto track with this particular plan. The question is, how do we move this forward quickly? How do we grow the hydrogen space so fast that all other parts of the ecosystem, the transport sector, the steel sector, the fertilizer sector, start changing their forward CapEx plans? I want them all to hear from each of you, magnify that voice, because I want to be able to go into them and I want to hear them telling us, we now have a transition plan that builds in this forward prospect of green hydrogen. We have enough comfort with the forward certainty. So what have we got to do to this? Yesterday, Mark Fulton, the world-renowned energy analyst at BNP Paribas Asset Management, posited that in Europe, the key thing was a carbon price of 45 euros a tonne. If we can get to 45 euros a tonne, Pierre-Etienne, I'm interested in your view about that, then that will change the economics of hydrogen versus gas and be essentially a turnkey part of it. Of course, we also have an emissions program in China, which might be part of this. Second idea, if we can engineer larger scale offtake agreements, as Paddy says, which could be pulled together by governments bringing together demand, then that itself will drive down the cost. Third question to Chung Wai. You're working with one of the leading new technology companies in the world, electrolyzers. We have 3 state-owned enterprises in China with different electrolyzer equipment coming through. What's the key thing that would make a difference to commercializing that faster and making Paddy's predictions of electrolyzer costs going down true? So comment, I've posited 3 things there, and then I want Zoe to task us about cost of capital. So what's the secret to unlocking the lower cost of capital piece that Chung Wai talked about earlier? Pierre-Etienne, can I start off with you?
I think even if having a 50 euros per ton carbon tax would, or carbon price, whatever the way you use it, is good. You need to take into account that €1 difference is equivalent to 100 euros per ton. So in fact, €1 per ton would be probably better, but that's why. In fact, the best thing that can happen is more systematic application of RED II type of regulations, which are basically pushing forward the need for refiners or petrochemicals to use a certain quota of green hydrogen and to basically pay for it, because it's a way for them to avoid all the type of penalties that they would have. And then that generates long-term large offtakes, and that can feed and load large green hydrogen production. I think this is fundamental. The second is to make sure we get the right PPPs in place to enable large retail networks for heavy-duty logistics to be put in place, so that you've got this transport demand to load the need for green hydrogen as well. So regulation and PPPs, I think, is fundamental.
PPPs at scale, what we're talking about. That's the volume procurement.
Yeah. PPP, so that you got 2 things. Regulation to push the use, a compulsory use of green hydrogen in the key downstream industries.
Which we could do in a couple of key areas.
Yeah, which is feasible, and they're going to pass the pricing cost downstream, and everybody's going to pay for it, but it's going to have a limited impact on the consumer final product. That's one thing. Second, PPPs is to help financial investors to move into the retail investments, because they get some secured returns, because the state is basically helping build the networks so that we can load it and develop the use by transport industry. Because the chicken and egg dilemma is not completely solved yet. That needs to be solved.
Chung Wei.
Yeah, I would say 3 factors. Now, one, technology advancement. I'm the technologist, always a big fan of the technology. If we can have a more advanced technology to improve efficiency, to reduce the cost of electrolysis, then that's one thing. Second is the scale. You need to have a scale to really reduce the overall cost. And the scale is not there yet right now. But I would say the next few years, if especially in China, if things start to move, if the momentum is there, then you will get the scale, you will get the capex down substantially. Now, third, in order to get there, I think the incentive is important. Now, you talked about the carbon price. That's one thing. But on the other hand, if you say, hey, I give a subsidy to hydrogen production, the green hydrogen production, that's the same as you increase the carbon price. Right now in China, there's a subsidy for fuel cell cars. Now there's a subsidy for hydrogen refueling station operations for the fuel, cost of fuel or cost of hydrogen. Now there is a subsidy for building hydrogen refueling stations. If you move further up, if there is a subsidy for hydrogen production from renewable sources or for green hydrogen production, then that will help to move things forward. So subsidy, technology, and scale.
Zoe, this capital question, which affects everything we're trying to do globally on the green transition, of course, we do have minus interest rates in Germany with the green bond that was sold last week, which was pretty extraordinary, which, by the way, the green component got a slight premium on the conventional bond. So a little bit of price difference beginning to show up even at negative interest rate German bonds. How's this going to work? How can we make the capital flow in these sectors? Because cost of capital in some of these sectors is still quite high.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Sean. I mean, in terms of mobilizing the momentum, as it were, we've got to do it in both Europe and ASEAN and China and all over the place all at once. And the drivers for the finance industry to be able to do that are capacity building in education around setting risk appetite. So we need to be thinking about risk requirements in a different way within the banking sector in particular, so that we can really understand how these technologies are going to be aligned with net zero outcomes and de-risk the economy as a whole, because we're moving to a low carbon landscape. So what we really need to do is a knowledge and education exercise, which is massive, and which is why HSBC set up the Centre of Sustainable Finance. The point was to work with external experts in order to understand decarbonisation roadmaps more effectively and be able to work with clients to understand how their transition plans are going to play out. So there's that knowledge and capacity building, but there's also investment readiness guidelines, and the work of the Climate Finance Leadership Initiative is really driving this, because of course, as you rightly point out, the landscape in one country in terms of policy support through capacity targets, hence de-risking projects and then bringing down the cost of capital, is very different from region to region. So setting out sort of a scope around investment readiness will help de-risk. Some of that comes from the PPP point that Pierre-Etienne made, and some of that comes from the standard geopolitical landscape that you would normally assess to think about risk. The technology point is important as well, and I think more transparency around at what stage each corporate and each country is at in terms of the cost base in their region. So for instance, the cost of power, the cost of renewables, the cost of electrolyzers, how that all fits together is something that I think on the banking side there's less expertise in, less awareness of, and so that's why that knowledge and capacity building is so important. But nonetheless, we do have, as I mentioned at the beginning, the right platform in place to be able to champion the moves that have already been made by the likes of the people on the panel and the likes of the governments that have set out hydrogen strategies. So I'm pretty optimistic that the financial sector can start to pretty quickly reassess that risk appetite for what previously might have been technologies that weren't really on the readiness scale.
Paddy, you built a great platform in Aqua with your shareholders to take forward this vision of change in the markets you're in. And you've also issued a green sukuk to tap this particular green finance market, which I think was a reasonably successful one. What do you see in terms of what people are saying today? Is this adequate enough, what's being said? Do we need more? Or actually, are you fine? Have you got your road plan cool and all you need is a few contracts which you're going to prove by providing low-cost hydrogen? Tell us. You're mute, Paddy, still.
The obvious answer, we need more, we need to do a lot more, because the challenge in front of us, the staggering prospect of not decarbonizing fast enough, and the consequences are mind-boggling. So nobody can sit there and say, kind of take this step by step by step. No. So we do need more. What we are trying to do, and we will continue to do, is continue to focus at what we can do rather than wait for what other people are going to do. So I'm not going to sit around waiting for this carbon tax. Forget about this. I think I think my grandchildren might be talking about it as some of those crazy things that those people were thinking of doing, 30 years ago, because by then we won't need it. I hope. But okay, so I'm going to continue to focus at reducing costs, because exactly like where we are with renewables. I mean, so today renewables propagation is not taking place simply because, this is the right thing to do, because this is the cheapest thing for that amount of electricity that we use when the sun is shining. You can't do it any other way. So we need to get hydrogen exactly to that place. Just think, so the world is needing more food, more fertilizers are getting consumed, more fertilizer plants are going to be built. We're going to need tons more ammonia. So forget about the 70,000 70 million tons that we consume today. Think about the next 70 million we want to make sure that that next 70 million is fueled by green hydrogen first. Okay, so in order to get there, we need hydrogen to come down to $1.50 is enough. And I think we can get there. So we will continue to keep focusing, and I think that is what we need to do. There is a huge, I mean, I'm so delighted about Green Sukuk, not just because of the, well, yes, because of the green part. So you now have the Islamic financing market community, I mean, that pool of capital, also recognizing the value of the green economy and starting to, because that's a huge source of capital as well. We need all the sources of capital, and we definitely cannot leave any pockets behind. So, so that's what is really exciting for me about that. But, and exactly like what Zoe said, we need more and more education, people to become more comfortable. The last thing we would want to see now is that, oh, wow, hydrogen. Oh, I don't understand this stuff. Come on. Every one of us went through school, and we, all of us, stuck two electrodes into a beaker and saw bubbles coming out. It's not rocket science. So we need more of that.
Great. You've heard it here today from a range of experts, and we're going to do something more with HBIS in the future with a special panel looking into the steel industry in China as part of our association with China Hydrogen Alliance. So Chang Wei, let's talk about that separately, because we want to make sure that story is available to people. You've heard here about the lower cost pathways for hydrogen. Paddy ended up saying $1.50, so $2 as a possible place we're going to get to. That would change the economics of everything if we get there. Between $3 in Europe, $2 in China on current projections, we've got a really robust pathway. Listeners out there, when we start thinking about how we transition our economies, it's not possible to do this properly unless we start looking at exactly what has to be done in each industrial sector and what the possibilities are and the levers to shift. This is a classic example. There will be another example in agriculture. There'll be other examples in aviation, which is why I gave you that little teaser of a video at the beginning. These pathways are possible. I want to refer you to the launch next week of the Energy Transitions Commission's report, which will be looking at industrial pathways in some detail. And you will have heard Lord Adair Turner yesterday speak about the highlights of that particular report. Transition is coming. It will be it is technologically viable. It's simply a matter of scaling up. You've heard the key drivers, especially getting to scale. We didn't get cheap solar prices because of R&D alone. We got cheap solar prices and wind prices because of massive renewable energy procurement commitments generated by the German government with their feed-in tariff scheme and other European governments, by the Chinese government with its massive procurement of solar, and the volume procurement allowed the R&D to be brought into the system, and it's made a virtuous circle, and now we have this rapidly declining cost curve, as Paddy has said. This is what we have to do in each of the technology-dependent sectors, and this is one of those going forward. Capital is ready to move. You've been hearing in the last few days, capital is ready to move, whether that be Credit Suisse talking about its customers, or whether it be President Jin of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or Monsieur Perrier, the chair of Amundi Asset Management. They are looking for places to place money which are consistent with the transition we have to achieve, we must achieve, to a low carbon and, of course, climate resilient economy. Investors understand that this isn't about sacrificing returns to save the planet. The reverse. It's actually about ensuring that you're going to be able to have sustainable returns. Because if you're not part of this transition, you are likely to be in a declining sector, a declining company, a declining corporate. Shifting to sustainable is a risk mitigation strategy for investors, but it's challenging to figure out where to put your money sometimes, especially when we have such a big wall of money trying to shift. And this is why your participation today, my panelists, in today's session has been so important and so useful. So thank you so much, Zoe. And Zoe, thank you so much also for your work at the HSB Sustainable Finance Centre. They continue pumping out fantastic reports on where we're going with this. Thank you, Chung Wei, for the work you've been doing on the technology in this area, because if that technology doesn't move, we will not be able to move. Pierre Etienne, you've been hammering away at this for so long. You've built up the Hydrogen Council. I think the wave is breaking. I think the wave is breaking. Jindong, apologies for our technical issues, but thank you for your commitment to the green transition, which HBIS has been very vocal and loud about talking about. And then Patty, what can I say? But thank you for your incredible optimism, not to mention the deals you're doing at the moment, which show us that we can do this going forward. Everyone, that's the end of this particular session. Very soon, we'll start our next session, literally in 15 minutes, with Frank Elderson, the chair of the 66 Central Bank Member Network for the Greening the Financial System, Satoshi Ikeda from the Japanese regulator, the JFSA, Rick Lacalle, who's the Global Chief Investment Officer of State Street Global Advisors, the second largest fund manager in the world, and Denise Odaro, who's chair of the Green Bond Principles and also head of investor relations at IFC. And then we have two other panels later on this afternoon. Thanks, everyone. Whatever you do, the future is transition to green. Think accordingly, plan accordingly, reallocate your assets accordingly. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.